probably that.
Lou? Can I have your attention? Do the remote sites hear us okay? Steve?
Yes.
Okay. Today Professor Crowley is in California, in Los Angeles, and he will join us a little later on via telephone connection. Our speaker today is Steve Emmerich. Steve is a senior associate and principal designer at Cambridge 7 Associates here in Cambridge. And Cambridge 7 Associates is a 60-person multidisciplinary design, planning, and exhibit design firm, and has worked on projects ranging from large-scale planning and public attraction projects to museums, hotels, schools, aquariums, and transportation facilities. Steve has been with Cambridge 7 Associates since 1984, and has worked on a wide variety of projects, including museums, large-scale aquariums, laboratories, and specialty exhibit projects. Steve is also a frequent design review critic at the MIT Department of Architecture, and has been a visiting professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and at MIT. Before we start the presentation, I'd like to tell you that the intent is to videotape this presentation for other purposes as well. And so if you can please keep your questions and discussion for after Steve has presented his case, I'd appreciate that. Steve?
Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate being here, actually. It's a real opportunity for a conventional architect to get a little glimpse into the world of what systems architecture is all about, and I'm actually quite overwhelmed and impressed by the level of shall we say, philosophical detail that you're getting into related to the development of understanding concept development and bringing in other paradigms, if you will, to understand how one goes about designing things. I have a title slide that'll be coming up at the beginning that folks in Cambridge see right now. It's called Real Architecture. That's meant to be a little controversial. I understand that you guys probably feel that you're doing the real architectural or virtual architecture, but it does, the word actually has a lot of meaning to what I understand you folks are up to, and in our world of civil or conventional architecture, the word pretty much means integrator, I think, and that may or may not have a widespread application to what you guys do, but we certainly are in a position to integrate not just a lot of I shouldn't say just, but various aspects of technical engineering fields, but also a field which may be a little bit alien to what you folks concentrate on, but nevertheless potential important ingredient, which is maybe why I'm here in the first place, because normally I think what I do is pretty far afield from what you do. But in any case, what I'd like to say that even though there's a tentative relationship between what most of you folks are interested in and conventional building architecture, that there's a piece of the discussion that I think is worth thinking about, talking about, and I think we could have a good discussion afterwards. It relates to understanding the difference between a product and what I might consider in conventional architectural terms an artifact, which is something that's more or less an open-ended system and has a life way beyond whatever the original design intent was. And that's a position that I'm personally coming from and that I think has a lot of relevance to the conventional architecture world. I've structured my talk today to basically give you a little slideshow because architects are visual. We generally don't give you formulas and that kind of thing. But I have structured some little aphorisms or phrases or bullets that I think relate to the way that we develop the integrative aspects of our process. And I have kind of posed a little question right at the front end that's an open-ended question that I think we could come back to in the discussion with a few slides. And then I have some words that I think represent main ingredients of our design process, and they start with the concept, context, which I've seen you folks have used a lot. Circulation's a word that I'm going to use, which I'll explain as we go through it. Character, which is a word that you probably don't use very much in systems design, and a word that you'll probably cringe at, magic. So I'll come back to these. And then after the little talk, the last part of the visual images that I have is a little case study of a building that we've just completed, and I'll run through quickly the design process on that, just as a point of reference for people that aren't familiar with how a building might come together and the integrative process of a building. I think that might be helpful for the frame of reference in the discussion. So with that, why don't we get started with the slides? Rob, I have a blank screen down here. Just touch, okay, it's on sleeping. Okay, menu. It's a different menu than we had previously. As soon as we get the menu up here, we'll go forward with the visuals. Is there a menu selection? Okay, okay. Okay. I'm excited about high-tech world. Okay, real architecture. Again, this is a teaser, but I think the meaning of the word in the way that I'm using it is basically an integrator, and we're integrating aspects of business, aspects of form generation, and what some people consider to be style. We're integrating numerous fields of engineering, and also marketing and symbol as well. Okay. Okay, this is a question that I'm just going to pose at the front end very quickly. What we do, I think, at the bottom line is we're trying to figure out how to make something work and how to make it nice or beautiful, and that's a criteria that I think in systems architecture and software architecture you're not very concerned about that aspect. But let me come back to that later. I'm going to pose a little kind of visual question here, and we'll come back to this. I'm going to use as an example a product, which I consider to be a product, and then a piece of a building. 15-meter racing gliders. Just take it as a random product topic. And I picked this one because I know there are some people interested in aeronautics here, and I fly too. But if you look at 15-meter racing gliders, this is a PIC 20. This is a 15-meter racing class glider, so it has very specific criteria. And then you look at, this is an LS4, I think. This is something that I'd never heard of before, called an SB12. If I'm going too fast on the slides, Rob, if you could let me know. I don't know if this makes a difference. Then we got a Hornet C. And notice that they all look pretty much the same. In fact, I think to those of you who aren't pilots or familiar with airplanes, they probably look exactly the same, except for the paint jobs, which is that's something that comes into the category of style, potentially, although there are reasons why paint jobs are different, too. And the last one is Ventus, Ventus B, and they pretty much all look the same. So I'd like to just have you keep this in mind as we go through the rest of this. And now, columns in a building pretty much do the same thing, like 15-meter racing class gliders are supposed to do the same thing too, maximize performance with certain criteria involved. Columns, you know, at the bottom line, hold the building up. They can look like anything, basically. I mean, here are a couple wood columns, more or less conventional columns. The range is infinite, essentially, but the engineering on it is variable depending on what the form criteria is. So you might ask, well, how does one decide whether you want to do what's up there right now, or something that's more figural? You have people standing holding up a building. That's not something that you might think of when you have a different set of criteria. And it's certainly not something that came to mind during the design of the 15-meter racing glider. They have just a piece of wood holding up a building. And here again, kind of a more conventional column arrangement. So one of the things that's happening here is that you have a somewhat dual view of the world. You have what I think some people consider, and I agree with it, there's a little bit of a couple, or a yin and yang, if you will, of dealing with polar opposites, in some people might consider, of what is an artistic endeavor and what might be a more scientific endeavor or engineering endeavor. Architecture needs to integrate all of those. Now, when the range of things that you can do is infinite, when you're combining all of these variables, including many that are subjective, the common ground for somebody to figure out a process to make something is very difficult and complex to understand, as you can imagine, which is why you can probably get an infinite number of people up here talking about architecture, and architecture of buildings, and they'll all tell you something different. But I think there is a common ground for understanding the process and the integration of the artistic and the scientific aspects of the design process. And a lot of that has to do with innovation and how we conceive of innovation, what makes something fresh. And I think your class actually has a lot to do with how one understands innovation. Okay, and of course many people tie that into a marketing process for innovation, which Apple may or may not be successful, but they're certainly trying right now in terms of packaging, or what one might consider the stylistic aspects of product development. And that premium that is put on innovation is something that can be very important. Okay, now let's go back to this, talking about duality of things, because humans tend to be, we tend to want to simplify things into things that we can understand, which makes sense, and quite often we have these couples, as I explained before, good and bad, and good and evil, that kind of thing, and I think that the civil architecture or conventional architecture is dealing with the heart of one of these couples, which is the idea of something having merit for its beauty versus something that is well engineered and performs a certain function, like sitting in this classroom being able to electronically go all over the country. And integrating those two aspects into a design process is one of the main things that architects try to do. You can see from this just casual list that I've put up here that some of the aspects that I'll touch on related to the concept, context, circulation, and so on are related to these couples, and also the one that I mentioned before about product versus artifact is another one of these couples. But let me just read down these quickly. Art and science, architecture combines those, and quite often there's a controversy and let's say a stance between beauty and function. Quite often there's a tension, if you will, between what drives the engineering of something versus what drives the form of something and what it looks like in the end. And in the product world, there's a very close couple between marketing and the business strategy and what something looks like versus maybe other more altruistic aspects of what somebody designing a city or a building might be dealing with. It's quite often coupled with your ego, too, about whether the form is attributed to you versus some larger human endeavor. Some of the other couples are open versus closed system, and I'm sure there are a lot of different meanings for that particular couple in your business. Timeless, meaning that there is not a defined life cycle to begin with, which is quite often the case in building or conventional architecture design, versus timely or with very specific life cycle costing. Metaphorical versus linear or empirical. Poetry versus prose might be one that is a good analogy or metaphor for what we're talking about here. And architecture, whether you intend it to be poetry or not, is something that is an urban artifact, and it is looked on as such whether you intend it to be or not, whether the designer wants it to be or not. So if you have a crummy designer that had no intention of making something beautiful, it still has a meaning to all of you individually as a symbol, and whether it's something worthwhile as a visual stimulus. Okay. The main topic of what I'm going to get into now is relating to form and function and concept generation. And what I've done, again, because I'm a visual guy, I've taken I have a crazy postcard wall at home, and I encourage people to send me crazy visual postcards, you know, the kind that have the fish in the middle of Iowa, that kind of thing. So I've taken some of my postcards and to form a little bit of a view of some of these major issues about the design process. Okay? Architecting or integrating science and art, quite often, if you think about it from an engineering standpoint, there's a real hierarchy between, well, the visual result of what you're doing, well, it's just wallpaper. It's, you know, you need to figure out how it really works, and then somebody will figure out how to make it look good. And I'm sure the guys at Ford can appreciate this, because the car industry kind of came from this world, and I think they're probably making good leaps and bounds about how to integrate the look of something with the engineering of something. But architecture is right in the crux of that, the heat of that discussion and controversy. How much should some formal aspect that relates to human activity or human feeling and emotion, which is something that isn't normally brought into design, how much should that drive the form of something? And, you know, so you can decorate your walls basically as one attitude, or you could really integrate the look of something into the function, which function does have an emotional side to it. Function is something that when it works well, people feel good, and it's something that is has a value. And having a metric for that value added is a tough thing. Many people understand the meaning of something that's well designed. Many people think that that's in the noise, and it doesn't matter what something is designed like if it performs well. But I don't know. In this case, you know, if a bra performs well, it makes you feel good, right? Okay, back to architecture as a combination of art and science. I'm going to try to move a little more quickly now because we've got a lot of images here. You know, it's hard. Here's an image of an airport, a postcard of an airport recently completed in Japan, and here's a view of some ceiling sculptures kind of designed to be placed in the public space. Where the sculptor stopped in terms of what the sculptor was trying to do, it's something that moves with the air movement in the airport, and the actual ceiling systems and the engineering of the trusses and the windows it gets to be a little bit blurry in this particular case. And so You can imagine that the form decisions of this did not strictly have to do with, well, we need to span, 25 meters and it needs to have natural light. There was a much more rich and much more variety in the set of parameters that determined what the exact shape was, and it wasn't prescriptive and predetermined by a client saying that we wanted to have X. The client was involved in a process which most likely was what I will call iterative, and we'll go through that in a second, where you go over and over and reach some consensus and then move on to the next stage where the consensus becomes a benchmark. Let's talk about this couple of art and science. Art first. An idea that an author that I've read, and I have a little kind of reading list if anybody's interested in any of this stuff. David Pye talks about art and primarily artifacts. He's talking about craftsmanship as a form of risk, and I really appreciate that viewpoint, because what I mean by that is that you can't precisely predict the outcome of every stage of the game. Quite often, as I understand your industry, in fact, you're trying to create enough of a sense before you do anything so that you totally predict the outcome. And in art, that's not the case. You don't know what the outcome's going to be quite often, almost never when you start. So it involves, here's a picture of a little kind of handmade sculpture that this fellow Simon Rodia made out in Los Angeles. I don't know if it's still up, but it became kind of a folk art monument, if you will. But, it was just an additive assembly of things that became interesting over time as a sculpture, and actually it can be inhabited like a place, a shelter, in fact. Science, on the other hand, and architecture, science plays a lot of different roles, has a more certain and what I would call linear process of predictability. And you slice and dice things until you slice it into a small enough chunks or bits of information that you make very predictable steps from one place to the other. Architecture integrates science from a technology and engineering standpoint, but also from what you might be calling human factors or human engineering, or just how the human body works. And in our case, in our firm, we deal with other animals too, in addition to humans. But there are things you could very clearly understand in a linear process. So you're sitting at desks in Cambridge that have tiered seatings. There are sight lines to the podium. There's a popliteal length between your knee and your ankle that says how high the seat should be so that you don't jam your knees into the table above. Those are all very knowable and things that you can design something to, but they don't necessarily tell you what kind of fabric to put on the seat, how soft to make the seat, what shape the seat should be, or what shape any of the stuff in the room should be. You still have to make formal decisions independent of those linear criteria. Architecture, when it integrates these two things, always has a life beyond what you intend it to be, and this is a big topic in a lot of different fields. I know it relates to flexibility and adaptability. But if you think about the most adaptable space for the room that we're in Cambridge, again, which is a fixed tiered seating room, it would be a flat room with nothing in it. That would be the most flexible, most adaptable room. Yet this room has a somewhat definable purpose for doing this distance telecommunications and learning function, and it's deemed to be more appropriate and usable, if you will, and pleasingly usable to accomplish that function. So flexibility is a tricky thing when it comes to something that has a life much beyond what you intend it to be designed for. This, I don't know if it's a Curtis Jenny, it looks somewhat like that, or a standard. It certainly wasn't designed to play tennis on the wings, but here they are doing it. And that is a very common thing with buildings. This room, who knows, might be used to sell hot dogs 50 years from now, if they still have hot dogs. Nothing to do with what it was designed for right now. There's not the same kind of life cycle criteria in artifact making. The architecting requires care. Everybody thinks, sure, everybody has to be careful about everything. I guess what we're particularly, and what I feel is a particularly interesting aspect of the design process, is that the actual small-scale details of a building are in fact what people relate to, because people deal with other people in dimensions of 5 and 10 feet away. And so the little things that you see and touch and experience at a close range are very important. So in a way, sweating the details is a very important aspect of what architects do. This just happens to be a slide of a Frank Lloyd Wright interior, where he's very compulsive about understanding how the furniture relates to the carpeting, relates to the lighting system, to the ceiling and everything. So this idea of integration can be carried into extremes, and good integrators are able to do things that have very powerful emotional content, essentially. Architecture is not just being able to integrate the stuff, but it's also being able to communicate the results, and that requires a language of communication, and there's a whole cultural baggage, if you will, to how the language and symbol of what you're doing works. And you're not working in isolation when you're doing a building or a room or a city. There's always the world and nature that you're relating to. The idea of language, here's a little Larson cartoon. You know, there's a guy down in the sand trying to get help, but he spells H-E-L-F instead of H-E-L-P. So the rescue pilot driving by says, you know, geez, guess he doesn't need help, right? Okay, there's a miscommunication. There can be very easy miscommunication in the symbol and language of architecture. Something that is required to have a high technology may not work at all if it has not an appropriate technology to do it. It may not be appropriate at all if the symbol is completely wrong in terms of the whole graphic appearance and communication of the graphics. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. That brings me to the context now a little bit more. Nature, I don't know how we can get away from it. We live in a world and we perceive the world through our own biological systems, so to me it's somewhat common sense that we would look to nature and the understanding of natural systems to understand how we humans would design anything. So that might be very commonsensical to you too, but I'm just stating it, that I think when you have something that's complicated because of its subjectivity and range of interpretation, and it has an infinite range of solutions, then certainly our natural systems that we perceive are complicated, complex, probably the most complex that we can ever think about, and that's our point of departure, our reference point for how we think about integrating buildings, or I think should be. So we look at natural systems. That doesn't mean you design buildings to look like trees or look like water or anything, but certainly the interactions in those natural systems are worth looking at to understand what we do. Okay, I mentioned this before. When we're talking about context, it's not just what I personally bring to a project that determines its integrative result or its formal result. There should be, and I think when you look at nature, there always are other informants for why something is the way it is. So it's not just your ego saying, well, I'd like it to be curved, and then you make something curved, or you'd like it to be straight. There is a good way to look at natural systems to understand why there are straight things, curved things, what the geometry is in nature, in a deeper way than just the superficial look at, you know, the way a bee constructs a hive or a tree or anything. I think that there's we're just starting to break into integrating areas of knowledge that give us a deeper understanding of nature, and I think we've got to take the ego out of it. There's more to it than that. So here's the case of ego. You know, you want your building to look like an ice scraper in Alaska. That happens certainly with architects. I don't think it's the best thing, but again, there's a much more serious way to look at looking at nature than to think of your personal imprint on something. Because of this, because it's not just your ego in determining form, designers of anything, including products, are certainly in a good position to influence the culture, the interaction of human contact and symbol and what people do. So there's somewhat of a responsibility in that regard that people that design things have. The people that don't design things I think never shows up on their radar screen. In that regard, get to a place called a culture of placemaking, which is that's another way of talking about context and developing context, is making places rather than making a product. This room, in that regard, when I say it's not a product, we're actually making a place for a whole bunch of human activities in this room that represent other kinds of feelings as well as performance criteria. And it also involves understanding how orderly something needs to be and how much variety something needs to have in order to provide interest to you. The fact that there is some curvature and focus of the seating in the room in Cambridge towards a central point provides an order to the way that you folks are all sitting out there viewing me right now speaking. There's potential in the selection of the colors and materials to give you some idea of excitement. Just what you chose to wear this morning does that. Whether you thought about it or not, it gives a symbol and a sense of either security or interest or voyeurism, if you will, to what you do in the rest of your day. So this works on a building scale. It works on a city scale, a room scale. Cities have this combination of interest caused by the variety and the implicit order. And if the order is something that we understand and appreciate as having some relation to other natural systems, then it can be pleasing and provide some kind of emotional benefit, which is the art side of things. If it's not, then it doesn't. I mean, there's a big difference between the slide that I just showed of an older medieval village in Europe and Anchorage or Houston or any other city that has a much different development process. Okay. The one thing that because we're talking about emotions and things that don't necessarily relate to a linear process, we use metaphor quite a bit, and I noticed, I guess you're talking about rules of thumb or heuristics in your class. That's something I'd like to learn more about myself in the way that you use the word. But quite often we'll use references as departure points of what has been successful in the past and what have the qualities of something been, basically evaluate the qualities of successful outcomes to see if you can get those attributes into the qualities of whatever you're designing from the artistic side. And again, looking at natural systems is something that's useful. Again, the activities that happen are also have symbolism. Just gathering around a table in the first place, being able to communicate with each other, sitting in the same classroom, has a whole range of emotional value and symbolism that causes a memory of this sense of place. It's the endoplasm, if you will, of this particular room. You might remember a year from now sitting in this lecture hall and, incredibly boring. What does this architecture have to do with what I'm doing? Or you might remember, oh, well, this is art stuff. What's this have to do with what I'm doing? Maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not. But some fleeting memory of this is potentially etched in your own collective memory of being together as a group, and that forms the experience of what some designers, I don't know who they were, designed at this point. And many of those things may be unintended. Let's see here. The organization of elements. I guess this goes back to what I was talking about with order. We can, the components of things can have a very tight rationale developed for each individual component, but may not and quite often doesn't have any relation to the whole. And architecture has a real, civil architecture has a propensity to having that problem because of the diverse range of input related to the artistic side of it. So it's quite often the order that one brings to something is lacking because of a lack of understanding of a good, strong natural reference, if you will. Again, this is talking about order as a framework for the form. Here, in the case, it's a stone building driven by the assemblage, if you will, of smaller units into something, and a lot of the form is driven by the fact of how one can assemble those various units. Okay, placemaking, emotive associations, character. Character is what I was talking about a second ago about your collective memory or the endoplasm of a place. Again, it's an emotional response to a place, and how one understands the thermal qualities of something, the light and sunlight qualities of a place are important ingredients of integrating science and art in architecture. Okay, cultural symbols. Quite often that wasn't me. Quite often what we do, like in language, any language, a word in one language might have a completely innocent meaning in the mother language, but in another language have a completely different meaning or inappropriate meaning. That happens with visual form as well. And so there are many cultural attachments to the symbol of form in conventional architecture that, again, this may not be a big ingredient of what you do, but it probably relates to the marketing and business strategy of what you're involved in, very much so. And in architecture, it's a very important tool in developing the look of something, to understand the relationship between the symbol and language of what you're doing and the physical form. Character, again. We're talking about the fact that architecture, like this is an example very similar to the airplane with the guys playing tennis on it. Here's a trailer, which is your abode, your place to be, and you decorate it. It can be an occasion for celebration, again, providing other layers of meaning to what you're doing. I mean, people have all kinds of mouse pads when they're working on computers. They try to change their environment, although they're locked into this very specific relationship between sitting at a seat and looking at a monitor, basically. So you try to, in small ways, change your environment, provide a different layer of meaning for what the environment does. Okay, circulation. This is a little bit of a tricky word and a misnomer. In some ways, it might be better, or more appropriately called access, but I'm calling it circulation just because circulation is quite often relegated to meaning how you get from one place to another in civil architecture, and I'm sure that there are many somewhat parallel relationships between design of other systems about routing and integration of routing and directions of things. But when you try to get a person from one room to another or from one building to another in a city along a street, the circulation is a very key element of the overall result of the building or the city, and key to the point where it shouldn't be relegated as leftover space, in fact, which is quite often the way that sometimes things are thought about, especially when it relates to engineering systems in buildings. That, okay, we need to get power, we need to get HVAC, lighting, all the stuff that needs to go into a building in order to make it work. Certainly the people circulation, or the way that you get from one place to another, actually is one of the main emotive characteristics that forms the result of getting to a nice place. And so the light control, the sound quality, the temperature control, the actual form aspects of the circulation are a very key ingredient that I think provides, when it's done well, a total experience that enhances the whole end result. And this is just an example of well, it's said it becomes the elemental armature for places to be. And, well, actually, another example might be a bit of a poet. A poet once said, you know, hunting is not those heads on the wall. It's a process result issue. You know, you can have the trophy sitting in your trophy case or the stuffed head on the wall, but that doesn't remind you of how fun it was and good it was to go hunting, essentially. So the hunting is an important part of doing it. It's not just collecting the trophy. Defines the gradient between public and private. There is a gradient of what's in public domain and what's in private domain, just because of the way people interact with each other. And this idea of getting from one place to another, circulation defines that. It also becomes the place for chance meetings and relationships, which also form the basis for how good or bad you feel about a particular place. These are all elements that we try to integrate into the space design. Here provides the memorable qualities of arrivals and departures, edges of things, boundaries between two different areas that are definable become important ingredients of the tools of architecture. Boundaries between the desk that you're sitting at and this more public place up here where I'm speaking is an important relationship that you need to be recognizing when you're designing a space or building. Now I'm come to magic, completely subjective. What kind of magic do you need in your systems design? Well, magic is relating to the emotional qualities and the integration of some of the artistic, formal language and symbolic aspects that I've been talking about with the engineering of it. And the magic can happen, again, as an emotional response to a city or a lighting situation or a weather situation, as well as the direct human one-to-one contact within a building. Here's where I think there's an ingredient of this life cycle issue that I mentioned earlier that I'd like to talk about for a second, which is that because architecture is always used for something beyond what the designer intended, it is beneficial to somehow try to incorporate planning for that. But if you spend too much time planning for it, you end up with something that's completely neutral. The San Francisco Bay Bridge is something that I think is commonly held as a beautiful span and engineering feat, and something that's a symbol for the city, in fact. Like the Eiffel Tower, there are a number of buildings and engineering elements that are seen as cultural attachments to cities like that. But the fact that there's a whole life beyond what the designer of the bridge had ever intended, again, is an important ingredient of what we do in conventional architecture. And again, that relates to this idea of placemaking and context, understanding context and integrating all of the aspects. Okay, now I'd like to go through a quick case study of a particular building, just to talk about the process, and then as I understand, I'll wrap up hopefully in 10 minutes, and we can get into a question and answer session. So while Rob's changing the slides, take a 2-minute break. Sure.
If you went to Japan, would an architect in Japan say very much the same things?
No, I don't think so. I think every architect that you would get up here would say something different. I think this is. I think there are many people of certain schools of thought that would say the same or similar things that I'm saying, but I don't think as a stereotype, if you will, that because people are attracted to architecture because of the ego quite often, and therefore understanding different ways to model and use or determine design processes are not something that even occurs to them. To model something according to looking at or taking a closer look at nature to understand how natural systems or biological systems work as a way to organize your own design process. I don't know that a lot of people would do that, but many people do. I think the integrative aspect of having to pull together artistic and scientific endeavors throws you into this category quite naturally, and therefore I think there's a lot of common ground in that regard. So going to Japan or Europe or anywhere in the world, I think you would find architects all over the world who do think this way. So, okay, are we all set? Oh, okay. Oh, I think he's still changing the slide projector there. Rob, if you could give me some kind of signal when you're ready, I'd appreciate it. Now, if I had this in PowerPoint, this wouldn't be happening, I guess, huh? Oh, here we go. Okay. Project I'm going to talk about, well, let me just give you a quick preface. The office that I work in actually kind of straddles a lot of different worlds, including conventional architecture, but we do sometimes industrial design-related things and graphic design-related things. And so we do, I'm not completely innocent of understanding some of the things that you might be doing. Back in the 60s, we worked with engineers at McDonnell Douglas to help design some of the interiors for the DC-10, and we've helped design subway cars and some of the routing, mapping, and graphic identity for the T in Boston. Take it or good or bad, we're responsible for changing what used to be about 6 different graphic identities for the subway system in Boston, from MBTA, MTA, and so on to the simple T. That was our idea, and the fact that you have a map that has different colors for the different lines was our idea as well. So we deal with graphic identity, legibility, industrial design, as well as architecture, and we've been working pretty much all over the world, even though we're a small shop. So it's been fun. But one of the specialties that we have has been working with natural systems as they relate to environmental education institutions, and we have a little subculture, if you will, related to aquaria, large-scale aquariums. And we did the original Boston Aquarium and have since become kind of default experts, but that's really just one little piece of what we do. We just finished an aquarium in Lisbon, Portugal, that just opened this spring. It's part of an oceans exposition. It's kind of a World's Fair, if you will, because this is the year of the ocean, 1998. People are learning more and more about how the systems in the ocean affect our daily lives, and this is kind of a public awareness exposition, if you will, related to it. So the idea of this aquarium that we developed is related to integrating an understanding of the world's oceans, and that is what informs the design, if you will, of the project. So let me just run through a little bit of how we developed some of the concepts for the building and show you the results, and that can be a little bit of an armature also for our discussion afterwards. The world's oceans, big, you know, it's as big a topic as you can get, basically. It's hard to narrow that, but it's hard to be more wide than covering a topic like that. And so what do you think about when you think about the world's oceans and the building shape? Tough order. But one of the main ingredients is that we start thinking about it from inside out, just because we have to have a little bit of a linear process too. We have to think about, well, what's going to be the main ingredient or the main ingredients to allow people to experience what the main issues are in the world's ocean right now. So we basically are taking some aspects of simplicity and water as an element, and using the concentration of the way that one understands water and movement of water as a way to guide the way that we think about the formal aspects of the building. We started with taking simple behavior of water, a drop and radiating waves, as a way to think about organizing the various plug-in elements of the geographic regions of the ocean. And go from there to actually developing some models or paradigms for how that separates into the various interpretive elements and the various layers, if you will, of exhibit criteria that we would want to develop for the interior experience of the project. A diagram showing that. Then from that point we actually go into understanding, well, what are the biological systems that we want to develop? What are the actual, what's the actual look, appearance, and performance of the biological systems that we're talking about for this world exposition building about the oceans? We developed more or less a central tank theme that shows the combination of all the world's oceans, and we've developed northern and southern ocean subsets that actually are able to look through the central ocean tank all the way across the building, which is about 120 feet, or actually it's more like 300 feet, I'm sorry, across. Then we develop what we had, I had been mentioning before, how one relates to the idea of experiencing each one of these ocean elements with circulation. But the circulation is something that's important as providing variety to the experience of each of the elements, and also order and organization, because we have thousands of people coming through the place as one of the criteria for the World's Fair. After the fair, or for the Ocean Fair, after the fair it will become a building for the city. We then go into developing further detail of the central tank, including the morphology of all of the subhabitats and rockwork for the animals, and all of the elements in the case of the northern and southern each quadrant, if you will. Each has its own particular habitat, whether it's ice or rockwork or tropical habitats and coral reefs. I'm just going around the quadrants right now, showing the detail as we develop that. And then, as we're developing the model for the interior experience, the exterior envelope, if you will, is being developed. This is an early study of the roof form, just to understand the basic enclosure for the way that we've developed quadrants to represent the oceans, and developing physical models to actually allow us, particular, and the client in this case, to understand what is in fact what people are going to see. We do develop electronic models as well, but we find for particularly the habitat work, it's easier to deal with physical models because of the intensity of the overhanging and underhanging aspects of natural form. You can't easily stylize a coral reef into something that's easily understood electronically. I'm sure you can in some program, but it's not something that we can do easily at our size and level of commitments to programs. Again, we've developed more detailed models of each particular habitat, and we're also using metaphor to understand aspects about the building that are not interior scale. We're talking about the exterior and the city, or in this case, it's not really a city. We're designing in a new park, if you will. It's an exposition that has all new buildings. It happens to be in an older area of Lisbon that is where the transatlantic flights used to dock, and it's been in disuse, and so they took over this whole area for the exposition. So it's a completely new context in this case. The aquarium is meant to be the centerpiece of the expo, so in this case it does call for a strong icon with powerful image rather than something that is deferential to an immediate context. Those are models. Let me just go back 1 second. Again, taking off on understanding characteristics of water and waves informed the way that we're thinking about the cross-section and roof structure of the building. In this case, we've got a tensile roof suspended in a wave, essentially to allow some openness as you go to the perimeter of the building, and essentially a dome over the central part of the tank. The striations and morphology of the rockwork also informed some of the urban design aspects of the building. There's an entry structure that needs to join the main structure, which is out in the water, and the idea of assembling various striations to allow people to go up on this bridge is something that was interesting to us. The elements of the project then come together in the construction, where we developed detail models of corals, specific corals of all of the species that are involved in the habitats. We developed artwork internally, graphics. These are made up of kind of pixelated tiles, which from a distance show up as larger fish shapes in your journey across the bridge to get to the aquarium. We developed, again, full-size mock-ups of various interface issues between people and monitors, in this case, for a particular interactive exhibit. And we develop exterior physical models for options on what might be the formal approach to the closure, the building closure envelope. We got dozens of options that we develop on this. Again, looking to some natural systems for how we might resolve some of those. These are the actual habitats under construction. Just to show you, part of the construction process is also an important design part of the design process, because many of the details are cut during the construction process. Because natural systems are complex, you can't necessarily predict everything beforehand. And this is, again, one of the larger habitats under construction, as it is today after just opening. The habitats have a public side like a theater, and an engineering or behind the house side, which deals with the whole life support system. This is a part that the animals experience, not the people. Well, the people that are curating the habitats experience. But there's a whole series of access and life support plant space that deals with the systems involved. This is just shows one of the artificial trees that relate to some of the behavioral issues in sea otters in this case for playing and work as a barrier as well, and an underwater view of the tank as it currently exists. An exterior picture of this bridge that also has uses some of the metaphor of the wave as you enter the project, so that from the exterior you're seeing the overall roof form related to this the water metaphor as well as the entry. So the excess or the circulation, if you will, relates to it. Here's an image of the pixelated larger fish, which at close range you don't see anything except an abstract pattern, but in stepping back it becomes something that's figural. Here's another view of that from the long range, and some exterior views of the building as it opened just recently, and just about done here. So that brings us back to understanding some of these words that I brought up in the talk of developing a concept related to metaphor and what one might consider a more subjective aspect of designing something, and the emotional aspect of something, understanding the context, and that's at a lot of different scales, including the micro and the macro scales. In this case, from an urban context, it's a completely new area where the aquarium became the centerpiece for that area, and that informed how large and iconographic the project needed to be. Talking about circulation is, again, not just getting there, but is something that provides variety and emotional experience in addition to the end place. The character, again, inheriting the qualities that form positive emotional results in our everyday experience, essentially. Whether you think of the result as something as being a positive result or not a positive result. And magic, which is this tie back to human interaction and nature, if you will. What we're able to communicate to each other, and whether that's a good or bad experience as we develop another couple. So the answer to the question that I posed at the beginning about how we do all this stuff in conventional architecture does relate to trying to understand natural systems more and relating that to the way that we develop a process. So that's the end of my slides or visual talk. I'd love to talk to you about this stuff. I'm sure I could learn a lot from you about systems design, and I thank you for being able to be here. So I think, I don't know, I did talk on the phone briefly with Jim and Mike and Philip the other day. I'm not sure whether they're in the audience and they have anything they were going to potentially discuss. Oh, okay. Okay. Are they still in the audience out there in TV land? No, I think
We are. Yes. This is Philip Hirschbacher here at Sikorsky. And I guess one of the things that was interesting about your case study for me is that we have often looked at understanding systems from the point of looking at a very big model and then decomposing it, where you seem to start with some general idea and then started adding on and building on that. So it seems sort of the reverse of the analysis method that we're generally taught.
Well, that's a good observation, Philip. I think it's fairly common that one views conventional architecture as a potential assemblage process because of some of the uncertainty involved in where a particular idea is going to head. And that's not always true. I mean, that's a pretty big generalization, but I think in the project, it depends a little bit on the project type. But I think the idea that when you put things together additively, there's always a new result that results from the couple, and then you have to reevaluate. So there's somewhat of, I think I mentioned earlier, a spiral process or an iterative process where you try something, test it. If it doesn't do what you want to do, you change it, or you then add on another piece to go to another step and then reevaluate. And it does, however, relate to the fact that there needs to be some guiding principle for a grand design or an overall framework to work within. Otherwise, you get complete chaos. And I think that's what I was referring to a little bit when I showed the picture of the rabbit with the antlers. You don't necessarily just get a good result by having this assemblage process, and I think what you folks are trying to get at, and what we try to get at too, is, well, how does one evaluate a critical view of the overall product or the whole thing to begin with? So I don't know where that leads, using the process that I'm talking about compared to the process that you're talking about. But certainly decomposing something and understanding the component parts gives you a nice rational way to evaluate all of those things to go to the next step. I'm not sure that in the end you still have to have somebody critically viewing the whole thing. We have a question here in Cambridge.
Architecture is not creating, it has influence beyond the ego and itself. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Well, I think quite often this is a very difficult and complex topic, first of all, but I guess my own opinion about that is that because our environment and architecture deals with environmental issues is something that deals with community and interaction of humans, I don't feel that it's necessarily best served by having a grand creator, so to speak, or somebody that is only answerable to themselves about a particular formal or product result, if you will. That what the success of our happiness depends on our, I think, successful interaction as a community, not just as an individual. And in that regard, I think the more appropriate architectures of the world and more successful buildings that are viewed as universally successful are buildings that have a process in the design where if it was a single creator, had a process to involve other people or common human activities as the main criteria for how they designed something. And in that regard, it's not just me on the whim deciding, well, I should make it look like this. I should, take a car and add fins that are 6 feet high just because, well, I think it looks cool, and just as my single decision. Or a building and do the same thing. And that's my personal opinion. I think there are many architects and designers of other things that feel that way, that there's a community responsibility, if you will, to the way that something is designed, because it's an environmental artifact. It's not something that you just stick in your closet and nobody else has to deal with. Yep.
For a project like this case study that you showed, I gather there must have been a lot of architects working together on that.
Yes, I would guess in our office we probably had, at least 15 people working on a project of that size, and then we had, I would guess, another 100 or so various people involved as engineering and other kinds of consultants, including life support engineers, scientists related to life support criteria, scientists related to plant material and habitat criteria, and then all of your more conventional disciplines, including life support for people, fire protection, structural engineering, civil, all of those good things that make a building come together. Yes?
So when how do you maintain the artistic creativity of individuals working in a team where how do you judge or how do you do conflict resolution in this kind of an environment? Usually, traditionally, an architect is seen as a single individual. For example, I cannot imagine that Frank Lloyd Wright worked as a team with some other people.
Well, no, in fact, Wright is a actually good example of knowing when to shut up and knowing when to talk. I think he had enough of an understanding of engineering principles to know when to push limits and get the right people involved versus to be quiet and let somebody else make a decision. I think a successful outcome either depends on a single individual who understands the value of the other disciplines, or it needs, in my opinion, a complete team and collegial relationship to develop a common purpose. And it can happen either way. Some single individuals have enough of an understanding, or maybe a couple of individuals have enough of an understanding of the value of all of the various disciplines to place high priority on certain things. That an architect who understands that a certain structural feature in a building could in fact be a very positive attribute of some formal aspect of what they're trying to do, will push that structural engineer to be part of that design process. And there are many structural engineers, trained as structural engineers, who are very sensitive to that idea. There was one just recently at MIT, Mr. Calatrava, who's he's very good at integrating ideas of formal aspects with engineering aspects of structures, basically.
If you're resolving the conflict between an architect and an engineer or a construction consultant, that's easier than how about between architects? For example, how do you maintain the unity of theme of something as big as the project that you talked about when you have 5 or 10 architects with their own vision?
Yeah, well, that's why you need common ground. That's why I'm proposing that it's not simply looking at your ego to understand why something is better one way than the other, because it's not Steve's view versus Jim's view. It's, okay, let's look at how the total aspect of this system, if you want to call it a system, works. What are the lighting qualities? What are the possibilities for how people are interacting when they're in this space? What are the color ranges of materials that are causing people to react one way rather than another? And you basically come to some kind of consensus if you're in a situation where you've got several designers that have to agree, or you could have one person who has enough vision to understand how all of those elements are important and essentially persuades the engineering team to buy into that common set of ideas to develop the project. But it's tricky. It's not, it's not the kind of process that you can say absolutely predictably that you can put a team together in such a way and have such and such a process and you'll get a great result. There are good architects that have crummy buildings. So Frank Lloyd Wright has a lot of buildings that many people despise. But some of those same people love some of the projects that he's done. And I think you can find examples like that of all architects or anybody who designs anything for that matter.
How much, you may have to repeat some of the questions here because they can't.
Oh, okay.
Where is the uncertainty in these projects? I guess I sense that maybe some of the people that on the technology side, the uncertain. If we made the analogy to that, there would be uncertainty on the materials, uncertainty that we're trying to integrate pieces that have never been built. That maybe there's a legacy on some, but there isn't. You know, once we move, there's no legacy data.
That's
okay,
right.
So we have this technology uncertainty that somewhat can drive architecture decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that? I guess our sense is that because civil architecture is somewhat classical, mm-hmm. that uncertainty is not as prevalent, is not driving. You're more focused on the aesthetic beauty, and it seems like we're grappling with this. Our drivers is not the aesthetic beauty. Mm-hmm. Our beauty is in the features and the functions. That we're trying to develop this technology, and there's uncertainty that these features and functions are even be wanted.
Right, right. I guess what I'm throwing out there for you to think about actually is I understand, I think, what you're saying and your question, but what I'm kind of throwing back is that because our scientific understanding of decomposing things and understanding how things work from a functional standpoint is based on our perception and developing perception, so is the emotional content or our critical ability to evaluate whether you like something or not. I don't know if you're married or have a girlfriend or something, but you were attracted to somebody to like them for some reason, and it's because of their physical features as well as their character and so on. It's not just because they had a job or they had some other functional criteria that you were trying to evaluate. So all I'm saying is that because we're part of a natural system as human beings, there are areas of knowledge related to perception, emotion, and cultural interaction that in fact can inform the decomposition of the linear and the scientific side of it. And I actually just, I'm by no means an expert in this area of understanding the areas of knowledge and their integration in general about how you design systems for computers or software and how that relates to my field. But I do know that because we as a culture are making great strides in recombining areas of knowledge. I stuck on a reading list this book that I just finished called Consilience. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. Okay. And I did that for a reason because, you know, basically one of the things that came to light in me reading the book is that, yes, you can slice and dice stuff enough to get a somewhat empirical understanding of how they interrelate. But we don't know enough yet to really make the same kind of predictions or prescriptions about civil architecture that you can maybe about performance of a computer system. But we might get there soon. I don't know. It's hard to say, but because beauty and the subjective emotional response to placemaking and all these other funny words that I brought up don't even come onto your radar screen, I'm saying, well, you might want to consider some of the aspects of that. And it doesn't have to do with making your chips round or making your chips, you know, have the qualities of building that I'm talking about, but it has to do with the way of thinking about natural systems, and that there are other aspects and other horizons of natural systems that haven't quite come into your way of thinking yet about the organization of your process. That's all. And I don't have a prescription for how to do that yet, but I do know that the way that you ask the question means that you've already separated out that kind of subjective appearance issue and the emotional response from any possibility of entering into what you do or what you need to do as part of systems design. And I'm not sure that in the long run won't be something that you're missing out on because of the way that we perceive things in general. And I can't help but think, and again I said this before, that it's common sense that natural systems are the most complicated that I'm guessing that we could ever perceive, and they work in ways that are not predictable to us right now. A lot of them aren't. Some of them are, I guess. So.
To offer an example from our experience here at Sikorsky, several years ago on the F-76, we had a design which was originally scheduled to have protruding rivets on the airframe, on the exterior surface of the aircraft. And as a result of the very vocal response of one of the customers, in fact, the president that we had at that time, we immediately changed to flush rivets, which was done primarily for aesthetic purposes, because that change ended up adding extra cost and weight, and so produced in a way a less efficient structure than what we had originally planned, but it was deemed to be a very important part of the selling point for the aircraft.
Well, it's interesting, but that One thing that occurred to me in just trying to understand the fields that most of you are involved with is the relationship between the appearance of something and how it relates to the marketing perception and business strategy primarily. And I'm not sure that in civil architecture that plays as much of a role as it does in product design, so to speak, because in civil architecture, not that we're all altruists as architects, but I think because civil architecture is environmental, it's something that you build and it's there way beyond when I'll be alive, most likely, unless somebody tears it down to put something else in. You're not necessarily trying to figure out what the market angle is and determining the market feasibility of some particular thing, which is a motivator in a lot of product design. You're either trying to make money by designing something that you'll sell a lot of, or I don't know what other reasons, just to develop technology to do something in a basic research field. You might be developing a product for that, but in architecture, it's very rare that those are the kind of motivators behind the design process in building conventional architecture. So, when we designed an aquarium for the exposition in Lisbon, I don't think it ever occurred to anybody that we would be designing another one like that for anywhere, for anybody. I mean, we use certainly our experience in the development of the technologies and the integration and our process, and that'll go into our next project by default, just by the makeup of who we are. We'll build upon those experiences, but we're certainly not, going to produce thousands of those, and that's a lot different than a product design, an aircraft or a car or computer system. Yes?
Some of the concepts that you explained in the last portion of your slides, like circulation, experience, those can be applied, for example, to a web page or a website that a company has.
Right.
So are you aware of any architects working in that area?
Well, yeah. The question relates to the experience that I was talking about here on civil architecture and web page design. I have to say that we have a bunch of frustrated graphic designers in our office we have our own web page, and there are a lot of frustrations about the control and graphic issues related to computer interfaces and web design as it relates to the experience of it. And I think it's going to take a while to work out. I mean, there are a couple fundamental things that are potentially problematic, and they relate in general sense to human interaction. One is that whatever you design on your web page isn't necessarily what the other guy sees from a formatting standpoint. And that's a very fundamental problem when it comes to control and experience, because it happens with email too. When I send you a letter, you don't necessarily get what I wrote, depending on your settings and how the different platforms work and what fonts you have and all of that business. So we're kind of out of control as it relates to the electronic world. The paper world and the slowness of the paper world allowed, I think, a much more positive control of these experiential aspects. And I know, I don't know that we're going to do anything about it. We have several people interested in that topic in our office, in electronic interface issues, because we deal with that in interpretive graphics and interactive exhibits in all of our projects. We have done a kind of real-time air traffic control exhibits and weather exhibits and so on, where we're trying to have real one-on-one real-time interfaces that get to be quite cumbersome because of the issue that you're raising. And that might be a very good topic for your fields in general to grapple with. But that's actually a pretty straightforward topic to tackle, because you know what the problem is. It's in your face. You just have, and you have a model for what you think is better, I think. If you were able to, as a designer, design a web page that looked exactly the way you wanted it to look to everybody else, that would be somewhat of a criteria that you could work on and figure out how to do that. But those are frustrating things right now. I mean, just this lecture is actually a good example. Here we have a very high-tech room that's working very well, but you know, I'm used to presenting this kind of soundbite bullet text information next to a visual image so that you can see the image with the text at the same time. I happen to have developed the 35mm slides that I had here as a coupled pair because I had done this once before and I enhanced it, and I didn't have time to basically put it on PowerPoint, which actually would have been a problem anyway, as it turns out. But we don't yet have the kind of ubiquitous technology to quickly go in and say, okay, that format didn't matter, let's just, if you want to stick a bulleted text image up with a slide image, you can do that in a sweat. We couldn't do it here today. And I'm not kind of downplaying the room or anything. I think it's fabulous, but I think those kind of technology interface things are pretty important, I would guess, in your world, but you have good, solid models to work from. You know what's better from what had been done in the past, and you're just trying to model your systems into something that's a known quantity as being better. It's not the same necessarily with building design.
Can I ask a question from off-site?
Sure.
Kind of as a follow-up to Brian's question, personally as an engineer, you know, I was reinforced to learn how to, you know, understand details and think very analytically. Now, your lecture was much softer and dealt with, you know, more abstractions and use of metaphors. Can you give us any advice on how we would develop similar skills as successful system architects?
Well, I'm not known for prescriptions, but I do think that's what I was trying to get at by trying to look at natural systems a little bit more and trying to understand in greater depth how aspects of natural systems, and that includes culture and human intervention and interface. Now these things are coming onto the horizon in the various fields that you're involved with. I know that in aircraft design they have human factors involved that, 20 years ago they probably didn't. Understanding how people think and how people react to things is an important driver, if you will, of how you'll get into various systems design that may not come onto your radar screen, as I said before. And there could be whole new fields of study related to biological systems, including add-ons to human factors that would affect, I would imagine, the kind of rational and more linear analytical way of thinking as an engineer. I don't know that I have a more precise prescription than that, because as in the architecture worlds, I can't say that if everybody thought like I thought, the world would be perfect and all architecture would be good. I think there are other complications and complexities to the way the systems and architecture and cities are designed that we don't fully understand yet, but we try to do our best. And I think looking to natural systems seems to be a good direction. Yes?
Yeah. Your comment about looking at natural systems for inspiration. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about that, and I'm trying to reconcile it with the example of the aircraft. Mm-hmm. All the engineers were trying to look at nature, look at birds, mm-hmm. trying to fly like birds.
Right.
But invention of aeroplanes needed a new twist. I mean, we had to forget about birds and try to, decouple the functions. So how do you reconcile these things? In modern electronics also, there is no analog in nature. Sometimes you have to go away from nature to look at new concepts, new architecture.
Yeah, that's true. The question relates to, well, when we designed airplanes, ultimately when we figured out how to fly, how people figured out how to fly, they didn't do it like a bird. They figured they jury-rigged some other system to make yourself go up in the air. I think that's true, but that's also the whole idea of designing aircraft and getting people to fly is still evolving too. It's not a done deal that that's the only way. That might have been the first way, in the same way that the first cars that were designed had quite a different model or paradigm for how they were developed compared to today's, although there are a lot of similarities. I can't help but think that since a lot of what human and other biological systems deal with are, low voltage electrical systems, I can't imagine that there aren't things there that would be great models to understand in terms of how you design and engineer systems. But again, I'm not an engineer. I'm certainly not an electrical engineer. So I don't understand those parallels. I understand the issue that you're getting at is that it's not a one-to-one correlation necessarily between simply trying to focus on something, some aspect of a natural system and saying, okay, I can make my thing just like that and then try to replicate it. I don't think it's that simple. I think there, and if we could understand all of the natural systems in that, to that depth, I think we would be living forever and not have any disease and all of that. So I think there's somewhat of a hit and miss research process to even get to that stage. But I don't know how to answer your question, but I can't help but think that the answer is in understanding the complexities of natural systems to help develop models and metaphors for problem solving, essentially. Yeah.
Just to kind of like make a comment about natural systems and integration in architecture. It seems to me that there is not one answer, and that's the role of the architect. The architect has to challenge and rethink the statement of the problem. And like as you said, you design this building, this aquarium in Lisbon, but it will be different next time you design it because you just don't. You always challenge. You always look at you challenge the statement. You look at the new environment, new perceptions, new styles of architecture, and they all come together. Now, when maybe like when you go to nature, what you do, like when you design a mouse, you try to have the movement to be smooth. You try to design the ergonomics of the computer terminal to match the natural ergonomics of the human. You don't have the mouse pad up here and try to do three-dimensional mapping on the monitor. So, as an architect, you always challenge the problem and you adjust to the current natural conditions, not necessarily imitate nature, but of the current natural position of the system.
Right, I think that's a key aspect, Mike, that you brought up. You're not merely imitating nature. You're trying to understand, as all of you, I think, are probably experts at, decomposing the components of what the natural system is doing. And the mouse and the computer is a great example. Look at all of the development in that area now from the different processes that people use, trackballs, mouses, little eraser heads on your laptop, and just to deal with that one control input. And people are evolving new things all the time. But sooner or later, the mouse looks like something. It has a shape. Some guy thought, well, it'll be curvy, it'll fit your hand, but it doesn't fit everybody's hand. And it might be disturbing for somebody to have a mouse that's contoured as if you're always holding a blob of clay. Macintosh just came out with a new mouse that looks like a little flying saucer. And there could have been a rationale that says, okay, I'm going to make it naturalistic or like a natural system, like your hand, to fit. But I don't know how many of you have seen the new iMac. It just has a little disc mouse. And they completely went away from this idea of the jet set contour mouse. And it might be just fine because that aspect of the sensibility of the tactile touch of having something in your whole hand while you're manipulating your fingers may not be an important ingredient of the control. Okay, the control might be more, you might be able to articulate the control more just by your delicate fingertip touch of this random circular form. It has nothing to do with contouring with your hand. And those are the kinds of ways of looking at human factors and interaction of human systems and natural systems that I think allow you to develop good criteria to evaluate engineering systems. But,
and architects should always challenge
yeah.
The current system and the current state of the system.
I think so, yeah. I think I'd seen in some of the literature for your course developing as mentioned before, heuristics, or a way to have rules of thumb that kind of back away from the detail of what you're doing to allow a bigger picture view of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But you also have to challenge those. You might be heading down the wrong direction with your rule of thumb.
Otherwise, every building today would be an Art Deco building.
Yeah, there you go. And that happens. You go through styles. I mean, just like clothing or fashion. You know, one year short skirts are in, the next year they're not. And I guess all I'm saying is in conventional architecture, although it's viewed to be stylized like that, when it's good, it's really not that way. There's a much more in-depth understanding of other kinds of layers of complexity and interaction, rather than merely a pastiche of wallpaper. So, I don't know, are there any other questions from television land? I think it sounds like we're wrapping up here.
Steve?
Yes.
Steve, can you hear me? It's Ed in L.A.
Yes, hi Ed. You're visually impaired.
I'm visually impaired today, but it's a beautiful day in L.A.
Oh, good.
I wanted to make a few comments and ask you a question or two as sort of a way to wrap up here.
Okay.
One of the early points you made was about art,
mm-hmm.
And art is a point of departure and so forth in the civil architecting process. And I'd like to observe and get you to comment on the fact that art is both a process and a product.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a product of art aspect of civil architecture, which is to say that once it's done, it is a visual thing and a thing that people experience, and a thing that can potentially impact their experience and even their culture at the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And there are aspects of that to map to some technical architecture. I mean, there is some type of technical architecture that actually also produces art, you know, like the 64 Mustang.
Right,
you know,
right.
Up to art that impacts culture. But then there's a process part of art, which is to say that civil architecting shares in common with technical architecting this creative synthetic process
mm-hmm.
That, you know, people sort of think of as the artistic way of thinking, which is in contrast to the way in which most engineers are taught to do most engineering tasks,
mm-hmm.
which is a little more linear and reductionist. You want to comment on that, or if anyone else on the line wants to comment on that?
Well, I think that's a good observation. I don't know if I could have any prescriptive or how-to comments related to it. I do think that there's somewhat of and maybe either a disinterest or a lack of self-assurance from an engineering standpoint that visual thinking is within their realm of interest or control, and I think that's too bad, because I think the engineering aspects of something are in fact from a good architect's standpoint, they're critical to the successful outcome of the architecture and appearance. In fact, that's why I think people have a kind of a common emotional response to certain kinds of architecture where the engineering is more evidently exposed or apparent that it's working in the way that it was designed to work. And there's a nice couple, if you will, between the appearance and the systems design. And if engineers, I guess, can understand the value that the value added, if you will, of the experiential aspects of something, then all I can say is they would be more in tune to understanding that interrelationship between the two, or the honest couple between form and function. I actually don't think that. I think there's. It's not easily said that form follows function. I think there's a little bit more of an interaction and reiteration between those two than that phrase that was popular by an architect who was famous for decoration had once said. So I think having an open mind to the value of the appearance side of something is might be the most I can say about that. I don't have a prescriptive way to include that in engineering education, but I'm extremely excited by what seems to be the mix of the way that you're presenting this class in trying to get at the kernels of information that might be useful in integrating those subjects better.
I have a question for the class, and I guess because I can't see anyone sitting here in LA, you're going to have to moderate this a little bit.
Okay.
But the question for the class is that, of course, they understand that one of my objectives of getting someone like you to come in and talk about something like this is to expose them to, in some senses, to search what you say for underlying principles, and secondly, to search what you say for alternative ways of thinking, because I keep trying to challenge them to realize that there isn't a unique way of thinking. And I'd just like to ask the class, other than some of the obvious ones that we've talked about a great deal in the Q&A, like metaphors in the natural world, what are a few examples of ways of thinking about problems that were exposed by Steve's discussion today that might be different from what you've heard from me or what you'll hear from some other engineer next week? Anyone want to take a stab at that out in TV land?
Everybody in Cambridge is thinking hard.
Good.
Yeah.
I noticed one thing. You mentioned a spiral type development that occurs in architecture and architecting different systems, and recently I've become aware of a similar process that's occurring in a very technology intensive field where they're trying to continually develop in a spiral fashion a technology such that they can field that product or field that system prior to its useful life or its life cycle being worn out. And it's about 18 months is what they're shooting for. They want to get something out the door every 18 months or an upgrade out the door every 18 months.
Well, I think that in that case, that's a real conscious effort to use that particular additive process, if you will, to couple with a business objective in that case. Whereas in architecture, it's using that what seems to be a fairly rational process of testing, retesting, questioning your answer, and then changing direction as a result, but all the time elevating your experience to the point where you know that you have a better thing here on the spiral than you did down here at the beginning. In architecture, in conventional architecture, I think nobody ever considers slicing that off at some point and actually developing a product to go out. But in some ways, there's an analogy in fast tracking in architecture, where you have you will develop certain aspects of a building design on a critical path or in advance of others because you want to get the thing done sooner for some reason, either a client request or there's an economic reason driving why you need to get it done. So you'll need to have a process similar to what you're talking about. But all you know in that process is that what you're doing at any one slice in time is better than what you've done before from a critical review standpoint, but you don't know how good it could ever get. Whereas in a building design, you kind of go through that spiral process, and then there is somewhat of a culmination at the end where you're not just taking a slice along the spiral somewhere, you're reaching a place or a pinnacle, which is a stopping place, which is the whole building. Unless you're doing something like a fast track process where you are putting individual components in and you don't have any complete understanding of all of the interrelationship of the components at any one time. You just have to go on faith that they're going to work out and that your holistic parameter for the whole building is good enough and flexible enough to allow things to work out in the end.
Anyone else out there have another new way of thinking